Shabbat Shalom. That was a good one. If you have been following your emails, you know that it's been a long week. If you start before Shabbat, we've had approximately 8 losses over the last 8 to 10 days in our community in different ways. And it feels particularly telling that this happens on the week when we lost the first Jewish couple. At the beginning of our Parsha, Sarah passes away, and at the end, Abraham passes away. So I honestly tried very hard not to talk about this, but my week kept drawing me back in one way or another. And so I want to share 3 things, so I'm back on track. I know the last few weeks I've been a little all over the place. 3 things that I think the deaths of Abraham and Sarah can teach us about facing loss in our own life. The first is something that happens in 2 instances in the Parsha. One is a little more subtle, and the other is much clearer. The first is that when Sarah passes away, her light disappears, the Midrash tells us, that her tent is empty. And eventually, Isaac and Rebekah, their new formed relationship, are able to enter, and the light returns. And one of the understandings of that is it is the beginning of our concept, may your memory be a blessing. That the idea was that at first there was only loss, but eventually they were able to find, Isaac was able to find blessing, was able to find her memory as a tool for bringing light to his new relationship, to his new status. And the second really hits the nail on the head, as they say. After Abraham passes away, Isaac and Ishmael come together to bury him. It is a verse. It passes almost, you could miss it, but it is in some ways the most poignant moment in all of Genesis. Could you imagine 2 individuals more slated to hate each other than Isaac and Ishmael? Every one of the successes of the other is somehow at the expense of the other. From the moment they exist, they are set against each other. Their futures challenge each other. Even the things that are struggles would make the other one jealous that you got that struggle instead of this struggle. Even Ishmael and his mother were kicked out of Abraham's home, and yet he comes back to bury him. There is a thing that happens sometimes when we lose someone, especially someone with whom we had a complicated relationship. When they pass, sometimes we're able to let the complication melt away. Sometimes we're able to let their memory be a blessing in a way the living relationship was hard. I've talked to multiple people who had some form of abusive relationship with their parents. No one was taken up a mountain and threatened to be sacrificed unto God, but people who had really, really difficult times. And after they passed, there was sadness and also a relief, not just because that difficulty won't happen again, but because the moments that were sweet could be remembered as sweet. There is, I don't want to say an opportunity because that feels harsh, but there is the potential for blessing for those relationships that are complicated, where you don't have to hold on to the complications anymore. You don't have to hold on to those moments that could threaten us, that could reopen the traumas they created. Instead, we can only hold on to the blessing, and it's okay. We're allowed to really and truly let their memory be a blessing in our life. The second thing I have just seen over and over again in the last week and a half is that it's really awful to lose someone. It sounds obvious and clear, but I have seen it particularly in those that thought they were ready. I've seen it with those who thought they'd been mourning their parent for a week, a year, a month, whatever the amount of time was. People who could say the words, their passing is its own blessing because as an end to suffering. But we're still devastated. We're still lost. We're still facing that difficulty. And I think we see that here again. In fact, Abraham is the first recorded person in the Bible to mourn. And it doesn't say he sat Shiva. It doesn't say he tore his clothes. It doesn't even say he put ash on his head, which was a common ancient practice. It said he bewailed her. He shouted and screamed. There is this notion, particularly in America, that we have that in the face of pain, we are meant to make each other feel better. I had a colleague call me and say, hey, I heard you dealt with something similar. How do I help a family who lost a child? What do I say to them? How do I make it better? And my advice, which by the way is not always good, but I feel okay about this time. My advice was, your job is not to make them feel better. Your job is just to be with them. The second thing we learn in our parsha is that loss is awful. That when we lose someone, it is bigger and harder than we can ever imagine it will be, and it doesn't go away. Sometimes we find a way to manage the burden, but it is hiding there always. And if you want to understand the proof, look in the corner at the two loud children running around. What is special about them? What is wonderful? When we say they're innocent, what do we mean? We don't mean they don't do anything wrong. Believe me, at least one of them does. Both of them. Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. We mean they don't know this burden. We mean the smiles on their faces are not touched by the truth that at some point we all find this place. We find this difficulty. And the third, the first example of romantic love in the Bible is Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac, who has every right to live his life as a broken and shattered human, who has experienced trauma and loss on levels that can't be imagined, is the first one to look at his wife and say, I love you. Romantic love appears in this moment, and the story continues. Isaac takes up the mantle, becomes a patriarch. Rebekah becomes a matriarch only after both Abraham and Sarah pass away. There is a third truth that is very hard to confront. And that is when we lose someone close to us, we a little bit die ourselves. The person we are to that person stops existing. When it's a best friend whom we call on a daily basis, we're no longer the person who calls that friend every day. When it's a parent, we're no longer the child who checks in and makes sure they have what they need. But, or rather, and, there is also the potential for something new to grow. Abraham remarries and has a slew more children. Not always a recommendation at over 100 years old, but you do you, Abe. Isaac finds a way to look at a second woman in his life and say, I love you. Romantic love is born only after the loss of his mother. God, do I wish, and I don't use the term lightly, that we lived in a world where we knew our best selves and could just be our best selves. And certainly I wish we lived in a world that we did not have to experience loss, that we could crawl around the floor our whole lives chasing whatever that toy is. But we don't. And in the face of that unimaginable difficulty, in the face of that burden that those of us who experience loss must carry day in and day out, we also have the chance to become someone new, and that new person can also be amazing. That new person can also do great things. That new person can also spawn generations. Kingdoms can create love that didn't exist before. I have spent most of the last week and a half either in a hospital or a cemetery. It has been not a week that I would like to relive, but I've also seen great beauty in the last 10 days. I've seen families lean on each other. I've seen families grow closer. I've seen people look at each other and find blessing when before they had only the ability to see the glass half empty. I wish we did not have to face loss, but I thank God for the example of Abraham and Sarah's family to know that even though we will have to and that we do, there is still beauty that can be found. Shabbat Shalom.